Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 26 March 2018. Now let us begin. Now we have taken this article from page 7. Now the first thing that we'll understand from this article is about GSAT 6A from the perspective of your upcoming prelims examination, and then understand as to how is it useful for the armed forces. Now let's first understand as to where it is placed in your UPSC syllabus. Now in terms of your prelims examination syllabus, it would be placed in current events of national importance, and in terms of your UPSC mains syllabus, GSAT 6A would be placed in your GS paper 3 in the subsection Science and Technology, Development and their Application, and the awareness in the field of space. Now let us understand about GSAT 6A. Now GSAT 6A is an S-band communication satellite, wherein the term S-band refers to the 2.5 GHz band, and this band is mainly used for mobile broadband services, such as for 4th generation technology like WiMAX, long-term evolution technology, among others. Now GSAT 6A is specially designated for the use of the armed forces, meaning that it would not be used for general purposes. And this GSAT 6A would have larger antennas on the satellite, which would allow better reception on handheld ground terminals, and because of this, it would not require large ground stations. So hopefully up till here, with regards to GSAT 6A, you have understood that it is a S-band communication satellite and is mainly used for mobile broadband services. And an example of this would be the counterpart to GSAT 6A called the GSAT 6. Moreover, GSAT 6A would be designated for use of the armed forces, wherein it would have larger antennas that would allow the armed forces better reception on handheld ground terminals, and therefore they would not require large ground stations. And so with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 11. Now the reason this article is in the news is because the Government of India has issued a draft defense production policy of 2018. And this draft, which has been forwarded by the Defense Ministry, has been opened for comments from the general public. Now considering the fact that this policy is currently a draft, so what we'll do is understand what are the aims and the objectives of this policy and its basic features, considering the fact that the final defense production policy would be released later on. So let us understand the draft policy from the original document itself. Now it would be a suggestion that if Government of India releases any form of policy, such as the draft defense production policy or the new telecom policy or any other, it would be helpful as aspirants of the UPSC Civil Services examination to first understand it from the original policy document itself. Now the draft defense production policy of 2018 has its mandate in the general budget of 2018 in which it was announced. Now let us understand the vision of the draft defense production policy of 2018. Now the vision of this policy is to make India among the top 5 countries in aerospace and defense industries by ensuring participation of the public and private sector, wherein fulfilling the major objective of this scheme of self-reliance in defense production. And this is because India is the largest importer of defense equipment, and therefore it becomes a major objective of the defense production policy to reduce the current dependence on imports and achieve self-reliance in development and manufacturing of several weapon systems and platforms such as fighter aircrafts, helicopters, warships, land combat vehicles, autonomous weapon systems, missile systems, among other weapon systems and platforms. And the year given by the Government of India for achievement of this is 2025. Moreover, the Government of India intends to have a turnover of around $26 billion in defense goods and services by the year 2025, and thereby creating employment in the defense industry of around 2 to 3 million people. And apart from this, to achieve exports of worth around Rs 35,000 crore by the year 2025. And finally, to make India a global leader in cyberspace and artificial intelligence technologies. Now let us understand on how the Government of India intends to achieve these objectives. First, the Government of India is encouraging collaborations between Indian and foreign manufacturers, such as under the SPM model, to acquire latest technology, manufacturing processes, research and development, and in other fields. Moreover, the Government of India intends to form a defense investor cell in the Department of Defense Production under Ministry of Defense to help micro, small and medium enterprises and other investors in defense production with regards to investment in the defense sector. Further, the Government of India would form a technology perspective capability roadmap which would list the various platforms and weapon systems which the Government of India intends to procure within the next 10 years, which would help the private industries to know what would be the likely opportunities in the defense sector. Moreover, the Defense Ministry has also simplified the Make 2 processes, which would make it easier to enter into the defense production sector. Moreover, Government of India would liberalize the licensing processes for defense industries and thereby would maintain a small negative list for which a license would be required for manufacturing. Moreover, the Government of India would ensure open competition between the private industries and the ordnance factories, wherein currently the ordnance factories have a form of monopoly in the licensing system to produce and manufacture defense equipments. The Government of India also intends to liberalize the FDI regime in the defense sector, wherein FDI up to 74% through the automatic route will be allowed in specific technology areas. Moreover, the Government of India would also focus on infrastructure development, such as in the form of defense industry corridors, which would provide infrastructure and facilities that are more specific for the needs of defense production facilities. Now, the defense industry corridors were also announced in the Union Budget of 2018-19, and the first defense industry corridor has been announced by the Ministry of Defense would be formed in the Chennai-Bangalore corridor. Now, hopefully up till here, you've gotten a brief understanding of the Draft Defense Production Policy of 2018. Now, let us revise what are the main objectives and the main strategies that have been given in the Defense Production Policy of 2018. Now, the main objectives of the Draft Defense Production Policy of 2018, with the first one is that it tends to make India one of the top 5 countries in aerospace and defense industries. The second main objective is to make India self-reliant in several weapon systems and platforms by the year 2025. The policy also targets to create a $26 billion Indian defense industry by the year 2025, and moreover, create employment for 2 to 3 million people in this defense industry. The fifth point is that the policy intends to achieve exports of roughly $5 billion in defense goods and services by the year 2025. The sixth and the last point is that the policy intends to make India a global leader in cyberspace and artificial intelligence technologies, more specifically in the relation to the defense industries. Now, hopefully you understand the main objectives. Now let us understand the main strategies that the Draft Defense Production Policy has highlighted to achieve these objectives. Now, the first main strategy of the Defense Production Policy of 2018 is of infrastructure development for defense facilities, wherein defense industrial corridors, such as between Chennai and Bangalore, would be formed. Secondly, there would be liberalization in foreign direct investment in the defense sector, which has been quoted as being liberalized to 74% through the automatic route. The third point is that the Draft Defense Production Policy of 2018 intends to simplify through open competition and licensing processes, wherein it would end the monopoly of the ordnance factories in the production of defense equipment. The fourth point is of the technology perspective capability roadmap, wherein the Government of India would inform of what it intends to procure or buy in the form of defense equipments in the next 10 years, thereby allowing the private manufacturers to plan ahead. The fifth strategy under this policy is to form a defense investor cell under the Ministry of Defense, which would help private companies to invest in the defense sector. And the sixth and the last main strategy given under this policy is a collaboration between national and foreign companies for joint defense production. Now, hopefully up till here you've also understood the main strategies of the Draft Defense Production Policy of 2018. Now we have to wait for the Government of India to come out with a defense production policy in the future. And as said earlier, you can also take a look at the Draft Defense Production Policy of 2018 by yourself. And a link to download the Draft Defense Production Policy of 2018 is given below in the description section. And now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from the editorial page on page 6. Now what this article talks about is that while referring to the idea of data protection, the author has observed that in India, the IT Act of 2000 is the only law as of now which provides for regulation of electronic communications and provides very little scope for data protection. Thus, the author suggests that India must take important lessons from the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the data protection framework of the European Union, which would be applicable from 25th May 2018 in all the member states of the European Union. And therefore, the author has suggested that India must take important lessons from the general data protection regime of the European Union in an effort to implement India's own data protection laws. So let us understand the important provisions of the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union that the author has highlighted, which can be used for a basic understanding of data protection law. Now, the first important provision is that it defines personal data, wherein personal data means any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person in terms of name, identification number, location, or any other factors in relation to physical, physiological, genetic, mental, economic, cultural, or social identity of this person. And therefore, it lays down rules relating to the protection of natural persons with regards to the process of their personal data, and thereby protecting their fundamental rights and freedoms, and in particular, their right to protection of their personal data. The third provision is that it provides the free movement of personal data, meaning that it should neither be restricted nor prohibited within the European Union. The fourth provision is that the General Data Protection Regulation makes consent an important aspect with respect to processing of data, wherein data controllers must demonstrate that the personal data that they have taken has been consented to by that given person. Moreover, this data protection regulation gives the individual the right to know for what purpose the data is being processed for. And apart from this, the individual would also have the right to have the data controller erase his personal data if the individual has withdrawn consent to provide such data. And hopefully up till here you have understood the basic provisions of the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union, wherein it defines personal data, wherein the physical, economic, genetic, cultural, mental, among other information related to a natural person. Moreover, it protects the personal data of a natural person by making consent an important aspect for processing personal data, wherein the data controller must show that he has taken the consent of that person and that person has also given his consent. And apart from this, the individuals also have a right to know for what purpose the data is being processed for, and to also have their data erased from the data controller if they withdraw their consent. Now, the author has specified that Indian data protection laws can be inspired from the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union, and therefore it becomes an important related aspect on how Indian data protection laws should be framed, with the four major concepts of personal data, free movement, consent, and the right to know. And with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 8. Now what this article talks about is the difference between special courts and fast-track courts. And therefore the difference between fast-track courts and special courts becomes important to understand conceptually for your prelims examination in the Indian polity section. And moreover, this conceptual understanding also becomes important for your mains examination in GS paper 2 in the structure, organization and functioning of the judiciary. Now let us understand the difference between fast-track courts and special courts. Now a special court is one which is established under a specific law or an act of parliament. And these courts deal with specific type of cases. Now example of specific laws or acts of parliament under which special courts have been formed: the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985, Benami Transactions Prohibition Amendment Act of 2016, among other such specific law or act of parliaments. Now fast-track courts were made on the recommendations of the 13th Finance Commission, and it was recommended to deal with the judicial backlog. Now fast-track courts are generally supposed to be set up by the state government in consultation with their respective high court. Now example of such fast-track court is that they have been set up for rape cases, to dispose of the criminal cases against Member of Parliament and state legislatures, among other various examples. Now hopefully with this, you have gotten a conceptual understanding of what is the difference between special courts and fast-track courts. that special courts are established under a specific law or an act of parliament and deal with specific type of cases, while fast-track courts were made on the recommendation of the 13th Finance Commission to deal with the judicial backlog in cases of rape, for cases against MPs and MLAs, among others. So now with this, we move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 9. Now what this article talks about is combating forest fires and is in the news because of the recent wildfire tragedy in Theni in Tamil Nadu, where a forest fire had occurred. Now the content of this article on combating forest fires becomes important from your GS paper 3 in the environment section, specifically in conservation. Now let us further understand on how to combat forest fires. Now whenever a forest fire occurs anywhere around the world, it is detected by NASA's Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer or MODIS and the Visible Infrared Imaging Radiometer suite. And this data is analyzed by the Forest Survey of India, which is located in Dehradun, which then forwards this information on any forest fire in India to the divisional forest officers of the Indian Forest Services, and these divisional forest officers then start the process of fire control with the help of the firefighting team. Now hopefully up till here you have understood that forest fires are initially detected by NASA, whose data is analyzed by the Forest Survey of India, which is located in Dehradun, and the FSI then relays this information to divisional forest officers, who then begin the process of controlling forest fires. Now let us understand what are the approaches to combating forest fires. Now the first approach given by the author is of the technological approach, wherein helicopters spray fire retardant chemicals or dump water to fight the forest fire. Now the technological use of the helicopters is not practiced in India since it is expensive. Now the second approach is to contain forest fires through the use of fire lines. Now under this approach, natural barriers such as streams, roads, bridges are formed along the hillsides or the plains. So basically a fire line is a line through a forest which has been cleared of all vegetation, wherein it divides the forest into various compartments, and assuming that the fire has engulfed this compartment, the fire line ensures that it does not spread to this compartment. Now the third approach given by the author is to counter fire. Let's say that this is the forest, and if the fire has engulfed this region and is thereby moving forward, a small strip of land would be cleared of all vegetation, and when the fire has reached near this line, then a counter fire would be started at this position, which would move towards the fire, and the assumption is when these two fires meet, they would extinguish each other out. Now the fourth approach given by the author is the most practical and most widely used according to the author, which is the manual approach, wherein people with leafy green burrows, which is used to beat the fire out. And this is the more widely used traditional approach in India. Now hopefully up till here you have understood the four approaches that the author has highlighted to fight against forest fires, wherein the first one is the technological use of helicopters to spray retardant chemicals and water on the fire, wherein the second approach is to use fire lines, wherein natural barriers in the form of streams, roads, among other, and thereby a line is formed which is cleared of all vegetation. The third approach is of countering fires, while the fourth, which is the more widely used approach in India, is of manual form of combating fire, wherein leafy boughs are used to beat the fire out. So if a question is asked in your mains examination on listing approaches to combat forest fires, you would be able to answer with the help of this article and the explanation given in this section. Now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's paper. Now we move on to the question for today.